Have you ever wondered why someone who seemed so caring and understanding suddenly becomes a complete stranger to you? Why they'll walk past you like you never existed, even after years of friendship or love? If you've experienced this with an INFJ, you're not alone. Today, we're diving deep into one of the most misunderstood aspects of the INFJ personality type, their ability to go completely cold and never look back. And trust me, once you understand the psychology behind this behavior, everything will finally make sense. 1. The INFJ personality more than just introverts. Before we jump into why INFJs can turn ice cold, let's understand what makes them tick. INFJs aren't just your typical introverts who need alone time. They're what psychologists call the advocates, people who see the world through a unique lens of empathy, intuition, and deep emotional understanding. These folks make up less than 2% of the population, which explains why they often feel like aliens in their own world. They're the ones who can read between the lines of what you're saying, pick up on emotions you didn't even know you were displaying, and somehow understand your deepest struggles without you saying a word. But here's where it gets interesting. This same emotional intelligence that makes them incredible friends and partners also becomes their greatest defense mechanism. When an INFJ goes cold, it's not because they stopped caring. It's actually the opposite. They cared so much that they had to protect themselves from further emotional damage. Think of it like this. Imagine you're a person who feels everything at 100% intensity. Every slight, every disappointment, every betrayal hits you like a freight train. Now imagine you've been hit by that train one too many times. What would you do? You'd build walls, and INFJs build the strongest walls you've ever seen. 2. The emotional intensity that sets INFJs apart. INFJs don't just feel emotions, they absorb them. It's like they're walking around with emotional antennas that pick up every signal in the room. When they care about someone, they don't just care a little bit. They invest their whole heart, their energy, and their emotional well-being into that relationship. This intensity is both their superpower and their kryptonite. On one hand, it makes them incredibly loyal friends who'll stick by you through thick and thin. They're the ones who remember your birthday when everyone else forgets, who check in on you when you're going through tough times, and who genuinely celebrate your successes as if they were their own. But on the flip side, this same intensity means they feel betrayal, disappointment, and hurt on a level that most people can't even imagine. When someone they trust lets them down, it's not just a surface-level disappointment. It cuts deep into their core beliefs about human nature and their ability to trust their own judgment. Here's what most people don't understand. INFJs have an internal emotional thermostat that's constantly running hot. They're always processing, always feeling, always trying to understand the deeper meaning behind every interaction. When that emotional system gets overloaded, their only choice is to shut it down completely. 3. Trust broken, the point of no return. For an INFJ, trust isn't just about keeping secrets or showing up when you say you will. Trust is about emotional safety, authenticity, and mutual respect. When that trust gets broken, it creates a crack in their foundation that's almost impossible to repair. Let me paint you a picture of how this works. An INFJ typically goes through what I call the trust-building phase with new people in their life. They start by sharing small pieces of themselves, testing the waters to see how you'll react. If you respond with understanding and respect, they'll share a little more. This process can take months or even years. During this time, they're not just getting to know you, they're building an internal map of who you are, what you stand for, and whether you're safe for their sensitive heart. They notice everything. How you treat waiters, how you talk about your ex, how you react when they're vulnerable with you. When that trust gets violated, it's not just about the specific incident. It's about the realization that their entire emotional map of you was wrong. That person they thought was safe, kind, and trustworthy, that person never really existed. And if they were wrong about you, how can they trust their judgment about anyone else? This is why INFJs don't just get upset and move on like other personality types might. The betrayal hits them on multiple levels. The immediate hurt from the incident, the deeper pain of realizing they were deceived, and the existential crisis of questioning their ability to read people. 4. The famous INFJ door slam, what it really means. You've probably heard about the INFJ door slam, that moment when an INFJ completely cuts someone out of their life without warning. But here's what most people get wrong about it. It's not actually without warning. INFJs typically give multiple chances, subtle hints, and gentle confrontations before they reach the door slam phase. The door slam is their final act of self-preservation. It's not vindictive or meant to hurt the other person. It's a protective mechanism that kicks in when they realize that maintaining the relationship is causing them more harm than good. Think of it like this. Imagine you're in a house that's slowly filling with toxic gas. You might try opening windows, using fans, or finding the source of the leak. But if nothing works and the gas keeps building up, eventually you have to leave the house entirely to save your own life. That's what the door slam is for INFJs. It's their way of leaving the toxic environment before it destroys them. The never looking back part isn't about being cold-hearted. It's about self-preservation. INFJs know themselves well enough to understand that if they look back, if they give that person another chance, they'll likely end up in the same painful situation again. Their empathetic nature makes it hard for them to maintain boundaries, so complete disconnection becomes their only option. 5. Emotional overload. When feeling everything becomes too much, INFJs are like emotional sponges. They absorb not just their own feelings, but the emotions of everyone around them. Imagine going through life feeling your own heartbreak, your friend's anxiety, your coworker's frustration, and the general stress of everyone you encounter. It's exhausting. When an INFJ reaches emotional overload, their brain essentially goes into protective mode. It's like a circuit breaker that trips when there's too much electrical current. The going cold behavior is their psychological circuit breaker protecting them from complete emotional burnout. This emotional overload doesn't happen overnight. It's usually the result of months or years of absorbing too much emotional intensity without enough time to process and recover. Maybe they've been the emotional support for too many people, dealt with too many toxic relationships, or simply haven't had enough alone time to recharge their emotional batteries. When they hit this wall, they don't just need space. They need complete emotional isolation from the sources of their overwhelm. And if you happen to be one of those sources, even if it's not entirely your fault, you might find yourself on the receiving end of their cold shoulder. The key thing to understand is that this isn't personal, even though it feels incredibly personal to be on the receiving end. It's a survival mechanism, and like all survival mechanisms, it's not always fair or rational. It's just necessary. 6. Past trauma and its role in INFJ behavior. Many INFJs carry deep emotional wounds from their past. Their sensitive nature means they were likely hurt more deeply than others during childhood or early relationships. These experiences shape how they approach trust and vulnerability as adults. When an INFJ has been betrayed or abandoned before, they develop what psychologists call hypervigilance. They're constantly scanning for signs that it might happen again. This hypervigilance can make them incredibly perceptive about people's true intentions, but it also makes them more likely to interpret neutral behaviors as threats. Past trauma doesn't excuse hurtful behavior, but it helps explain why INFJs might seem to overreact to situations that others would brush off. What looks like a minor disagreement to you might trigger memories of past betrayals for them. What seems like a simple misunderstanding might feel like history repeating itself. The going cold behavior often stems from this trauma response. Instead of risking being hurt again, they choose to emotionally disconnect before the situation can escalate. It's a learned survival strategy that helped them get through difficult times in the past, even if it's not always the healthiest response in the present. Understanding this doesn't mean you should walk on eggshells around INFJs, but it does mean recognizing that their reactions often have deeper roots than what's happening in the moment. 7. The inner conflict, wanting connection while protecting themselves. Here's one of the most heartbreaking aspects of INFJ psychology. They desperately want deep, meaningful connections with others, but their past experiences and emotional sensitivity make those connections feel incredibly risky. It's like being someone who's allergic to their favorite food. You want it so badly, but you know it's going to make you sick. INFJs often find themselves in this position with relationships, craving the intimacy and understanding they need, but terrified of the potential pain that comes with vulnerability. This inner conflict creates a push-pull dynamic in their relationships. They'll draw you close when they're feeling safe and optimistic, but pull away when their fears and insecurities take over. For the people in their lives, this can feel confusing and frustrating. One day they're your best friend, sharing their deepest thoughts, and the next day they're distant and unreachable. The going cold behavior often happens during the pull-away phase of this cycle. It's not that they don't care anymore, it's that caring feels too dangerous in that moment. They're trying to protect both themselves and you from the potential fallout of their emotional intensity. This internal struggle is exhausting for INFJs. They're constantly battling between their desire for connection and their need for self-protection. Sometimes, going cold feels like the only way to stop the internal war and find some peace. 8. Perfectionism and unrealistic expectations. INFJs are notorious perfectionists, and this extends to their relationships. They don't just want good relationships. They want perfect, harmonious, deeply meaningful connections where both people understand each other completely and never cause each other pain. Of course, this level of perfection is impossible in real relationships. People make mistakes, miscommunicate, and sometimes hurt each other despite their best intentions. But for an INFJ, these normal relationship bumps can feel like major failures. When reality doesn't match their idealistic expectations, INFJs often swing to the opposite extreme. If the relationship can't be perfect, then maybe it's not worth having at all. This black and white thinking can lead them to abandon relationships that could have been repaired with communication and compromise. Their perfectionism also applies to themselves. INFJs often hold themselves to impossibly high standards and beat themselves up when they fall short. When they realize they've been naive about someone or made a mistake in judgment, they don't just feel disappointed, they feel like failures. This self-criticism can fuel their decision to go cold. Instead of working through the problem, they conclude that they're bad at relationships and it's better to avoid them altogether. It's a form of emotional self-punishment that ends up hurting both them and the people they care about. 9. The all-or-nothing mentality that drives their decisions. INFJs don't do anything halfway. When they care about someone, they're all in. When they're interested in something, they dive deep. And when they decide someone is no longer safe for them, they cut them off completely. This all-or-nothing approach is both their strength and their weakness. It allows them to form incredibly deep, meaningful relationships and pursue their passions with intense focus. But it also means they struggle with the gray areas of human relationships. Most people can have casual friendships, maintain cordial relationships with exes, or continue interacting with people who've disappointed them. INFJs find this much harder to do. For them, relationships exist on a spectrum from completely trusted inner circle to complete stranger. There's not much middle ground. When someone moves from the trusted category to the unsafe category in an INFJ's mind, they don't just lose some privileges, they lose all access. It's like being downgraded from VIP status to being banned from the venue entirely. This mentality protects INFJs from further hurt, but it also means they lose relationships that could potentially be salvaged. Someone who made a mistake or went through a difficult period might find themselves permanently shut out, even if they've learned and grown from the experience. 10. Self-preservation mode when survival trumps everything. When an INFJ goes into self-preservation mode, their usual empathy and understanding take a backseat to pure survival instinct. This can be shocking for people who are used to their warmth and compassion. Suddenly, the person who used to care about everyone's feelings seems completely indifferent to the pain they're causing. But here's the thing, they haven't actually stopped caring. They've just temporarily shut down their emotional processing system to protect themselves from further damage. It's like putting on emotional armor. It keeps the bad stuff out, but it also prevents the good stuff from getting through. In this mode, INFJs make decisions based on what they need to do to survive emotionally, not on what's fair or kind to others. They're not trying to hurt anyone, but they're not particularly concerned about it either. Their focus is entirely on protecting their own emotional well-being. This can look selfish to outsiders, especially since INFJs are usually so considerate of others' feelings. But it's important to understand that they're not choosing to be selfish. They're choosing to survive. When someone feels like they're drowning, they don't worry about splashing the people around them. They just try to get to safety. The never looking back aspect comes from their recognition that looking back, second-guessing themselves, or giving people second chances has hurt them in the past. In survival mode, they stick to strategies that have protected them before, even if those strategies seem harsh or unfair. 11. The role of intuition in INFJ cold behavior. INFJs are guided by their intuition more than most people realize. They often just know things about people and situations without being able to explain how they know. This intuitive ability is usually quite accurate, which is why INFJs tend to trust it completely. When an INFJ's intuition tells them that someone is dangerous to their emotional well-being, they listen. Even if they can't point to specific evidence or if everyone else thinks that person is wonderful, they trust their gut feeling above all else. This intuitive knowing often precedes their decision to go cold. They might start feeling uncomfortable around certain people or sensing that something is off about a relationship long before any obvious problems appear. When their intuition finally proves correct, when the person betrays their trust or shows their true colors, it reinforces their belief that they should always listen to these inner warnings. The never looking back behavior is often driven by this same intuitive sense. Their intuition tells them that giving someone another chance would lead to more pain, so they don't question it. They've learned to trust their inner guidance system completely, even when it leads to decisions that seem harsh to others. This reliance on intuition can sometimes lead INFJs to write people off prematurely. Their intuition might be picking up on someone's temporary emotional state or reacting to their own trauma triggers rather than accurately assessing the other person's character. But because their intuition has protected them in the past, they tend to follow it without question. 12. When empathy becomes a liability, INFJs are known for their incredible empathy, their ability to understand and feel what others are experiencing. But this superpower can become a liability when dealing with manipulative or toxic people. Because INFJs can see things from other people's perspectives so easily, they often make excuses for bad behavior. They understand why someone might be cruel because they're in pain, or why someone might lie because they're scared. This understanding can keep them in harmful relationships long past the point when they should have left. When an INFJ finally realizes that their empathy has been used against them, that someone has taken advantage of their understanding and compassion, it creates a profound sense of betrayal. It's not just that the person hurt them, it's that they used the INFJ's own kindness as a weapon. This realization often triggers the decision to go cold. The INFJ recognizes that their empathy makes them vulnerable to manipulation, so they shut it down entirely when dealing with that person. It's like turning off a sense that's been giving them false information. The never looking back aspect comes from their understanding that their empathy will kick in again if they give the person another chance. They know themselves well enough to recognize that they'll start making excuses and seeing the other person's point of view, which will leave them vulnerable to being hurt again. 13. The protective wall. Why INFJs build impenetrable barriers. When an INFJ decides to protect themselves from someone, they don't just put up a fence, they build a fortress. These emotional walls are designed to be completely impenetrable because INFJs know that their natural empathy and desire for connection will tear down anything less substantial. Building these walls isn't easy for INFJs. It goes against their natural inclination to understand, forgive, and connect with others. But they've learned that sometimes walls are necessary for survival. It's like living in a dangerous neighborhood. You might want to leave your doors unlocked and trust your neighbors. But practical safety requires different choices. These protective barriers serve multiple purposes. They keep the harmful person from causing more damage, but they also protect the INFJ from their own tendency to give too many chances. INFJs often struggle with boundaries in relationships, so complete disconnection becomes their way of maintaining a boundary they might otherwise be tempted to cross. The walls also protect others from the INFJ's potential anger or resentment. When INFJs are deeply hurt, they can experience intense negative emotions that they don't want to inflict on others. By going cold and maintaining distance, they prevent themselves from saying or doing things they might regret later. These protective barriers can remain in place for years or even decades. INFJs don't tear down walls lightly. They built them for good reasons, and they're not convinced that those reasons have changed just because time has passed. 14. The long-term impact of going cold. When an INFJ goes cold and never looks back, it doesn't just affect the immediate relationship, it often has lasting consequences for how they approach all future relationships. Each time they have to cut someone out of their life, it reinforces their belief that people are ultimately untrustworthy and that emotional distance is safer than vulnerability. This can create a cycle where INFJs become increasingly isolated over time. They start out open and trusting, get hurt, build walls, and then find it harder to be vulnerable with new people. Each protective measure makes the next relationship a little more guarded, a little more cautious. The people who get cut off also carry lasting effects. Being on the receiving end of an INFJ's cold treatment can be incredibly confusing and painful, especially if you don't understand the psychology behind it. Many people are left wondering what they did wrong or how someone who seems so caring could become so indifferent. This dynamic can create misunderstandings that persist for years. The INFJ believes they were protecting themselves from a toxic person, while the other person believes they were unfairly abandoned by someone they trusted. Neither perspective is entirely wrong, but the lack of communication prevents any real resolution. Over time, INFJs might find themselves with smaller and smaller circles of trusted people. While this protects them from potential hurt, it also limits their opportunities for joy, growth, and meaningful connection. The very thing they're trying to protect, their capacity for deep relationships, can become stunted by their protective measures. Conclusion: the phenomenon of INFJs going cold and never looking back isn't about being cruel or heartless. It's about survival in a world that often feels too intense for their sensitive hearts. These individuals feel everything so deeply that they have to choose between building walls and risking complete emotional destruction. Understanding this behavior doesn't mean excusing it or saying it's always the right choice. Sometimes INFJs do overreact, build walls prematurely, or cut off relationships that could have been saved. But recognizing the psychological mechanisms behind their actions can help both INFJs and the people in their lives navigate these challenging dynamics more effectively. For INFJs watching this, remember that your sensitivity is both a gift and a challenge. While protecting yourself is important, try to communicate your boundaries before reaching the point of no return. Consider whether some relationships might be worth the effort of working through problems rather than ending them entirely. For those who love an INFJ, understand that their need for emotional safety isn't negotiable. If they've gone cold with you, look honestly at your own behavior and consider whether you might have violated their trust in ways you didn't realize. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is respect their boundaries and give them the space they need. Ultimately, INFJs go cold because they care too much, not too little. Their intense capacity for love and empathy requires equally intense protection when that trust is broken. While their all-or-nothing approach to relationships can be challenging, it's also a reflection of their deep commitment to authenticity and emotional truth. The goal isn't to change INFJs or convince them to lower their walls. It's to create a world where sensitive people feel safe enough to remain open, where trust is honored, and where emotional intensity is seen as a strength rather than a liability. Only then might we see fewer INFJs feeling the need to go cold and never look back. Remember, behind every cold INFJ is someone who once believed in the goodness of people and got hurt for it. Their walls aren't built from indifference. They're built from the ashes of broken trust and shattered expectations. Understanding this is the first step toward healing, both for INFJs and for the people who care about them.